Welcome back, everybody. Here is another short lecture focusing on the three theories that we use to explain a whole bunch of different political outcomes in comparative politics. So there's a lot of information on this slide. There was a lot of information in chapter 1 about these theories, sometimes getting into some pretty minutia type stuff like historical institutionalism. But what I really want you to focus on is that we're talking about three broad sets of explanations that you can imagine that you have three different sunglasses in front of you, right? When you put on those sunglasses, maybe the first pair, interest, has rose-colored glasses. So when you see the world, right, you're looking at it with like a pink perspective. Maybe you put those pair of sunglasses down and you pick up another pair, right? This is our beliefs-based sunglasses. Here, maybe they have a green hue, and so you are looking at the world and everything looks a little bit green, right? And then our last pair of sunglasses that we're picking up might be structures. Let's say this has a yellow tint to them. So when we see the world, we're seeing the world with a yellow hue. And another way to think about this is it's not just that the colors of the world might be different, but that we're emphasizing different things, right? When we're putting on our interest-based sunglasses, we're looking at, say, for example, individual people. We're looking at groups of people who are making decisions. When we're putting on our beliefs-based sunglasses, we are not looking at individuals, but we're actually looking at like political cultures, so like bigger groups of people, like societies, right? These are the things that we're emphasizing. And when we put on our structural sunglasses, we're not looking at individuals. We're not looking at like groups of people. We're actually looking at kind of the political rules of the game, so we're emphasizing different things. So these are just three different ways to think about how do we explain a whole range of different political behaviors and outcomes in comparative politics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about interests. All right, rational choice theory. You all have probably encountered this in your classes, and even if you haven't, I'm sure you've heard the expression, right? Weighing the benefits and the costs. So rational choice theory has these assumptions that are listed here that you all can read, right? And basically, it just assumes that people make decisions in politics, right? Because they have some goal that they're trying to achieve, and they want to maximize that goal by selecting the option for achieving it that will give them the greatest benefits at the lowest cost with the highest probability of success. And so, for example, terrorism can be a rational choice per this theory if we think of it as something strategically that organizations do to achieve their goals. So there are some pictures here, or screenshots rather, of two books that focus on terrorism and, for example, even suicide terrorism, right, that really emphasize that organizations have goals that they want to achieve. Either it's regime change, they want to rule the government and the country, or they want to secede, right? They want to make their own country, and they maybe have tried elections and that didn't work. They've tried to protest and that didn't work, and so now violence becomes their preferred choice for achieving that goal, right? So suicide terrorism also can be rational if we look at it from that perspective. We're not making any kind of normative judgments about it. We're not saying that it's good. Clearly it's not, right? But what we are saying is that we can think of this as a rational choice. Also focused on our interest-based explanations for how the world works, we have psychological theories, right? So unlike rational choice, which assumes that we're always trying to maximize some utility, psychological theories emphasize things like emotions, our personalities, our personal backgrounds and histories, right? There is a link here to interview about a documentary about Bill Clinton and his role in trying to negotiate the Oslo Accords, which relate to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so if we're trying to understand why Clinton was involved in that process, we might look at his personal history. We might look at him growing up in a volatile family and taking on this role of wanting to be a peacemaker because of that experience, also being religious. And so, this conflict, which incidentally is not about religion per se, it's about land. It's just something for which religion has been used to mobilize people. But nonetheless, right, there is a religious dimension to the Israeli Palestinian conflict. And so, Clinton's personal background and history is what would have motivated him to get involved. So, those are the two perspectives under the interest-based category. Next, let's talk about beliefs. So if you kind of think about this, we're moving up in the scale of going from like individual people and small groups of people, and we're focusing on them as to how they make decisions, to now we're going up a little bit higher to a bigger societal level. So political culture, right? If we're trying to explain different outcomes, we might think of the political cultures that countries have. There's a link here to a really interesting article from elections for the chancellor position in Germany that took place a few years ago. You should be able to access the article itself through this link. And I thought this quote here in particular was pretty telling about the role of political culture, right? So you can read that on your own, just to kind of give a sense of how the political culture of a society as a whole might influence politics, and in this case, the way that candidates present themselves when they run for office. We can also look at political ideologies, part of this belief-based category as well. Political ideologies are much more formally organized worldviews. Usually they're a coherent set of ideas. Sometimes there can be inconsistencies between them. We'll focus on that when we talk about socialism and communism in particular. But this is just another way of trying to explain how the world works by focusing on ideologies. All right, and then our last explanation for political behavior is structures. So here what we're doing, we're again going up like another level of analysis. We're looking at entire countries as a whole and the way that they're governed, their political institutions, which are essentially the rules of the political game, and we're using that to explain different outcomes, right? So one basic way we can think about political institutions are, is your country democratic or not, right? Are you a democracy? What types of political rights do you provide? And that is it for this mini lecture.